This is a track for dealing with traumatic events. Tragically, people are traumatized in various ways every day. People are beaten, shot, exposed to death and near-death experiences, threatened, raped, involved in natural disasters and many other traumatic things. Other less dramatic things, such as relationship conflicts, situations, work, or social experiences, also might traumatize us. Despite perhaps a difference in severity, the process is the same. First of all, it is highly encouraged for you to work this material with a therapist. This is psychoeducational material only outside of a therapeutic relationship, but it can be used to enhance and organize your healing from traumatic experiences that you have suffered. This is not designed for abuse. Abuse is characterized by repeated and cruel violations and invalidations, such as childhood physical, sexual, emotional, or psychological abuse. Abuse obviously has components of trauma, but it involves much more. While there are common elements in trauma and abuse, this is a somewhat simplified approach by contrast. But as you are deciding which to participate in, it may be helpful for you to know a bit more about how they differ. A prior history of abuse greatly increases the risk for current abuse, but that is not assumed here. So this track has no particular attention paid to current abusive environments. There is a separate presentation available if that is the case. This track also doesn't include much emphasis on self-esteem. Long-term abuse tends to destroy an individual's spirit. So part of dealing with trauma in abuse requires a building or the rebuilding of the self to do that. I've included parts of that track here, namely the victimization and guilt and shame segments. Trauma often happens more randomly in the context of more expected and non-traumatized development. So this track doesn't include all of those elements. Alcoholism and other addictions are often ineffective means of coping in both trauma and abuse, but addictions are not covered directly in either track. A separate addictions track is encouraged if that is a concern. Many of the other elements are the same. Anger, loss, and other violations are covered here in the context of dealing with traumatic events. There is a greater emphasis in this track, however, on processing the trauma than letting go of the victim role in a non-violent manner, getting past the sense of being responsible, as well as resources for dealing with chronic pain and disability if necessary. Like in the explanation I offer for the abuse track, I caution you to use the spiritually inclusive pieces of material only as you feel absolutely comfortable with. Like in abuse, we often are angry with God for not protecting us from traumatic experiences. I'd encourage your working through those issues at some point, but in your own time. Finally, but unfortunately, traumatic things outside of abuse do happen to individuals who have been abused. If that is the case, it's possible that working both tracks might be useful. But if you do, I would encourage you to start with the abuse track, definitely including all of the self-esteem and goal-setting series. Starting there will help build yourself up enough for dealing with traumas from childhood and now. Overall, the length and organization is then that the first session is an introduction and discussion of addictions as a possible separate needed track. Second session includes an introduction to and continuation in the three-part module on anger. The third portion is an introduction to and continuation in the two-part module on victimization. The fourth part then is an introduction to and continuation in the four-part module on guilt and shame. The fifth component is an introduction to and continuation in the two-part module on loss. The sixth portion then is dealing with the trauma per se on its own. The seventh portion is an introduction to and continuation in a three-part module on chronic pain and disability if needed. The eighth component is an introduction to and continuation in the two-part module on assertiveness and boundaries, again, if needed. Ninth session is a short conclusion. That is, there are approximately